It is a moment of unbridled, deeply shocking horror. One young woman is on an ordinary night out. She's filming her friends, relaxing, dancing, then this. A few seconds later, she's dead. The head of the FBI and the president said today was a terror attack, but the families have desperate, searching questions.
Why are we giving them access to weapons that could kill so many people so quickly, so easily, all by themselves?
So is the answer in Raqqa, in destroying Islamic State? Or are we back to the same old issue, gun control? And if so, what would it take for things to really change? Meanwhile, here in London, in Liverpool, in Manchester, in Glasgow, people have gathered tonight to show solidarity with the dead. Also on News at 10. The French say well-trained Russian hooligans were to blame for Saturday's violence in Marseille, but 6 England fans are jailed. And the big clunking fist swings at the Brexiteers. Gordon Brown brings clarity on Labour's EU message.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. Once your brain computes the basic horror of an attack like the one in Orlando yesterday morning, the questions crowd in. Perhaps the critical one today, why? But even when you hear the answer, still, why? Today we found out more about the killer and his 49 victims, and it has to be said that didn't give us much of an answer. Over time, Omar Mateen claimed contradictory allegiances to different terrorist groups, including Islamic State. Donald Trump did make some political capital out of it, saying America's dysfunctional immigration system could not protect its citizens. But President Obama said the perpetrator was inspired by, rather than directed by, a terrorist network. And he said the nation, once again, had some soul-searching to do about gun control. As for what went on inside the nightclub, well, let's be blunt, that makes for tough viewing.
It is the most deadly assault on America since the Al-Qaeda atrocities of 2001. This time it was a mass shooting that appears to be a horrifying hybrid, both a hate crime and a terrorist attack. Families are still being notified, as one by one, bodies are identified. At least 49 people were gunned down, and dozens more are injured and being treated in hospitals across the city. One of those who escaped is Chris Hansen, the man here on the left helping an injured woman reach safety. He described to me how at first he thought the gunshots were part of the soundtrack.
It was music or a remix until you look over and you just hear a continuous bang, 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 and it was just nonstop. It sounded like it was a whole song because it just went on, and then it was silent for a moment and then continued just over and over again. And bodies were dropping.
This video, posted in real time on social media, captures the gunman's opening shots. The woman who filmed it did not survive. Questions are being asked now about the police response. Should SWAT teams have stormed the nightclub immediately? Yes, according to this mother, who's still waiting for news of her son.
You think they needed to be much more aggressive, much sooner?
Definitely. I came by there at 4 o'clock in the morning and nobody was there yet. They were waiting for people to go in there. Oh.
Christine Lyon is understandably outraged that the killer, Omar Mateen, was able to get his hands on such deadly weapons.
One man alone with a hate-filled heart could hurt and kill that many people because he had an automatic weapon. Why are we giving them access to weapons that could kill so many people so quickly, so easily, all by themselves?
The gunman was frighteningly well trained, according to survivors. Chris Enzo's friend Rodney was badly wounded.
Rodney described the shooting as he could hear the bullets hitting bodies and people dying and screaming. So as this guy was moving and taking the shots, he wasn't hearing bullets hitting the walls. He wasn't hearing bullets hitting anything but people.
At the White House, the president, having been briefed on the investigation, said Mateen may have been self-radicalized.
At this stage, we see no clear evidence that he was directed externally. It does appear that at the last minute, he announced allegiance to ISIL.
But from the Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump, tonight, simply more incendiary rhetoric.
If we don't get tough, and if we don't get smart and fast, we're not going to have our country anymore. There will be nothing, absolutely nothing left.
He spoke of banning whole classes of people from entering the U.S.
When I'm elected, I will suspend immigration from areas of the world where there is a proven history of terrorism against the United States, Europe, or our allies, until we fully understand how to end these threats.
And then he attacked his presidential opponent Hillary Clinton on gun control.
She wants to take away Americans' guns and then admit the very people who want to slaughter us. Let them come into the country. We don't have guns. Let them come in. Let them have all the fun they want.
In fact, Mrs. Clinton called only for a ban on semi-automatic weapons, which she said are more suitable for the battlefield.
We have to make it harder for people who should not have those weapons of war. And that may not stop every shooting or every terrorist attack, but it will stop some and it will save lives.
Grief and campaign rhetoric are now combining to make this a critical moment for America. Solidarity for the victims being overshadowed by this country's bitter political divide. Robert Moore, News at 10, Orlando.
At the heart of the political argument and behind the stark statistics, there are, of course, the real-life tragedies of people enjoying a night out. One of them was 23-year-old Stanley Almodovar. His mother was woken at 2 a.m. to hear about the shooting. Earlier, she'd made food for when he came home from the club. Another was 26-year-old Eric Rivera. He was one of the many Puerto Ricans killed. And then there was Kimberly Morris, who's recently started working as a bouncer there. Well, as those victims' families look for some kind of explanation as to why they died, Omar Mateen's father said today the shootings had nothing to do with religion. He said his son had not been radicalised, but he was known to the FBI.
There was little in Omar Mateen's past that could have pointed to the carnage he would unleash in the largest act of terrorism on American soil since 9/11. And this is hardly the environment you'd expect a violent extremist to be raised in. It is a comfortable middle-class neighborhood in southeast Florida, where he grew up. But the house of Omar Mateen's family is now cordoned off with a constant police presence outside. Omar Mateen's father spoke to me today.
Raggy Omar from ITV News, what can you say about his purchase of the firearms?
I'm not aware. We spoke about last night on TV. I'm not aware. I said, you heard me that I said, if I didn't know, I would have called the law enforcement myself and I would have arrested him.
He was investigated twice by the FBI. First in 2013 after co-workers raised concerns about claims and threats linked to Islamic extremism he'd made. And again in 2014 for links to an American suicide bomber in Syria. On both occasions he was questioned, but both times deemed not a threat. And authorities in Saudi Arabia also confirmed he had visited the country in 2011 and 12.
I wasn't aware of it.
You didn't see any telltale signs?
He wasn't the way that the radical, I mean, it's not religion, because he wasn't growing beard, he wasn't getting very disrespect and neglecting his wife and his kid. I didn't see none of those.
What's emerging from those closest to him is a picture of a young man who wasn't just radicalized, but was also unstable. Sitora Yusufi is his former wife.
A few months after we were married, I saw his instability, and I saw that he was bipolar and he would get mad out of nowhere. That's when I started worrying about my safety, and then after a few months he started abusing me physically.
Today, the FBI gave more details about the man they'd investigated, but who'd left no concrete evidence of his path towards terrorism.
We see no indication that this was a plot directed from outside the United States. and we see no indication that he was part of any kind of network. It is also not entirely clear at this point just what terrorist group he aspired to support, although he made clear his affinity at the time of the attack for ISIL and generally leading up to the attack for radical Islamist groups.
Omar Mateen's father is now left to bring up his 3-year-old grandson and ponder his son's horrific legacy.
Well, Raggy is still at the home in Florida tonight. Raggy, this is one of those very difficult ones, isn't it? Very hard to, assess this man's journey. Do you think there were clues there the FBI could have and should have picked up on?
Well, they picked up every clues that were out there, clearly, because he first came on their radar back in 2013 when he began to make comments, contradictory comments to co-workers, suggesting that he was flirting with radical Islamist ideology. They interviewed him then, but that was inconclusive. There were a few more telltale signs in which he was picked up again later on for further interviews. But it's very, very difficult when someone is self-radicalized, is also very unstable. We're hearing from his wife, his former wife, about how he was bipolar and very, very unstable and lashed out and abused her. So you've got this complex situation where you have someone who's very unstable and then at the last minute becomes self-radicalized. One FBI agent described it almost as though we used to be looking for needles in a haystack, but it's very hard to know when those needles actually are nothing more than straw. So it's almost impossible to try and find these kind of clues and stop a path to radicalization that ends in such violence.
Raggy, thank you very much indeed. And Robert Moore is in Orlando. Robert, I don't know if you could hear Raggy there, but we're talking about the nature of this man's radicalization, almost the late nature of it. Does that inevitably bring us back to what President Obama was talking about, gun control? And if so, is anything going to change, and what?
Well, we have an astonishingly stark and shockingly stark choice in many ways now. We've got Donald Trump really bringing fringe ideas into the mainstream of the American conversation, talking not about gun control, but about, unbelievably perhaps, arming up America. And he's talking about meeting the NRA to talk about how to deal with what he calls this new age of terror, trying to put more guns, in his view, into the hands of American civilians. On the other hand, we've got Hillary Clinton, as you heard, talking about a potential ban on semi-automatic weapons. That is all well and good, but in reality it requires her to seize control of the White House in November, but also Democrats to seize control of the House and Senate. And even then, Tom, it would be an epic political battle ahead.
Robert, we've talked so much about Donald Trump, haven't we, these past months. What did you make of his intervention today, though?
Well, I think what we're really seeing is an attack here at this nightclub behind me that's exposing the fault lines that already exist in America, not just about gun control, but about immigration policy, about attitudes towards minority groups, towards national security and counter-terrorism. So it's all in the mix here, and an ugly presidential campaign has got even worse. And what we're left with is a country that is united in grief, but totally divided in its politics.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed. Now, the fact that Omar Mateen seems to have been acting alone has not stopped police from checking that everything that needs to be done is being done to stop a similar attack here. Scotland Yard says there is no intelligence to suggest one, but have stepped up patrols anyway, particularly at locations linked to the gay community, which tonight across Britain gathered to remember those who had died.
Bound together in shock and sympathy. In London's Soho, they remembered Orlando and rejected the homophobic hatred that had ended so many lives. After the silence, applause. But beneath the show of defiance, organisers admit there's fear that terrorists will strike here too.
So far, we have been lucky. But I think the consensus is it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And so there is that nervousness among everybody, no matter what their sexuality is.
LGBT communities around the country showed their solidarity. In Liverpool, they lit candles. But there's a growing belief that they may need more protection.
We are going to be reviewing all of our major events. As we do, it's natural that we do that, it's sensible that we do that. I'm not saying we're going to change how we're going to police that, but it's sensible we just look at it in light of what happened yesterday.
Although there have been no specific threats in the UK, officer numbers are likely to be increased at major events. There is a sense, perhaps, in the past that the threat posed to the LGBT community by Islamic terrorists has not been sufficiently recognised or appreciated by the police. But after what happened in Orlando, that is certain to change. In Manchester, hands were linked. Today, sadness standing in marked contrast to the start of the Pride Festival. 2 weeks when advances made in recent decades are celebrated.
The thing that most of the LGBT community must realise is not to be scared, not to be avoiding these places where we all find our sanctuary, but to be vigilant.
We make up with each other.
Advice they sang out, renewing their determination not to be defeated by terrorism. Juliet Bremner, News at 10, Soho.
Well, let's move on now to the other big story of the day, the violence in France. A French prosecutor said around 150 well-trained Russian hooligans known as ultras were mostly to blame for Saturday night's violence. None of them has been arrested. In unconnected news, 6 English fans are behind bars in France tonight, sentenced to between 1 and 3 months in jail. No one is suggesting English fans are blameless. But what is going on there?
That they were organised, determined and extremely violent was obvious to anyone who saw the violence in Marseille this weekend. Now the French authorities have admitted a gang of 150 known Russian hooligans managed to get into the country and indeed the stadium to foment 3 days of brutality. Not one has been arrested. Describing them as ultra-rapid, ultra-violent and extremely well-trained, Marseille's prosecutor acknowledged some had been stopped at the airport, but the rest breached French security and are free to infiltrate other games.
Il y avait des hooligans de nationalité russe.
The hooligans from Russia travelled from other countries on trains and in cars, he told me. We would have known and arrested them had they come through the airport. These are films produced by the Russian ultras of their training sessions. They give a chilling insight into their commitment to extreme brutality. The Russians were the most organised and violent, but it was the English fans who were in court today, 6 in all arrested for violence. Among them, Alex Booth from Huddersfield, jailed for 2 months for throwing a plastic pint pot. His father told me he turned 20 yesterday whilst in custody and was guilty of being verbally abusive but not violent. The judge thought differently.
It's a disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace. Making scapegoats out of poor kids like Alex. Find the real thugs. Excuse me.
During the course of the weekend, 35 people were injured, 4 seriously. These scenes led to UEFA's threat to throw both England and Russia out of the tournament. Today, England's manager and captain Wayne Rooney appealed to fans for no repeat.
I'd like to ask the fans, please, if you don't have a ticket, don't travel. And for the fans with tickets, be safe, be sensible.
I'm appealing to you to stay out of trouble and to try and make certain that these threats that are being issued are never carried out.
This city is now calmer than it's been for 3 days. In jailing fans today, the French are clearly trying to send a message that violence won't be tolerated. That message is weakened significantly by the fact that no Russians have appeared in court. Emma Murphy, News at 10, Marseille.
So England fans will need to be on their best behaviour this week before, during and, of course, after the game against Wales on Thursday. But the logistics for the next few days don't exactly help an already tense situation. On Wednesday, Russia will play their second match in Lille, this time against Slovakia. And on Thursday afternoon, England and Wales fans will descend on the small city of Lens, which is just 24 miles from Lille for the British encounter. And I think, Neil, we can join Neil. His live has been in and out of this programme because it's not easy on the streets there. So, Neil, let's just move on. We're trying to talk to you quickly. How are the police going to prevent further trouble?
Well, a sense of foreboding here about how this all unfolds in the next 72 hours. A series of meetings underway tomorrow between British police and UEFA security officials as well. I understand the FA, the English FA chairman, Greg Dyke, tonight writing to UEFA, expressing his concerns about how some of this has been handled over the weekend, certainly down in Marseille. But a big challenge for the French authorities here. They've increased the French security measures, a noticeable police presence here in the centre of Lille. Of course, one of the issues is that the ground in Lens has a capacity of around 35,000. So tens of thousands of fans who are thinking of coming here are being advised not to by the Welsh FA and the English FA as well, Tom.
OK, Neil, thank you very much indeed. Well, back here, the big clunking fist of the Labour Party isn't wheeled out so often these days, but the man given that nickname, former Prime Minister Gordon Brown, came bearing down on the referendum debate again today. You may recall his intervention before the Scottish referendum. Well, some thought that pretty critical. Today's in Leicester appeared to be another tour de force, just what Labour Remainers hoped. They are desperate to counter any drift amongst their supporters to the Leave campaign.
No, it's not the European single market, it's the covered market in Leicester, where I've come to assess whether one important reason why the Leave side seems to be pulling ahead in the referendum battle is that too few people know Labour's position. You know where Labour stands on the referendum? Are they in or out?
I think they'll be out.
I'm not sure either.
They're leaving, most of them.
Do you know where Labour stands on the referendum?
Unfortunately, no, because I'm still reading the facts, to be honest. To remain in the UK.
Yes. And do you know what you want to, how you're going to vote?
I'm going to vote definitely leave the EU.
I think it will be in.
And what about you personally? Where do you stand?
I stand with Labour.
Yup, in fact, Labour is for staying in.
The European Union is not the cause of the problem.
And so I met this former Prime Minister who's trying to relaunch Labour's pro-EU campaign. Will you share a platform with senior Tories, with the Prime Minister? Do you think Jeremy Corbyn should share a platform with the Prime Minister?
I think at the moment the necessity is to get the Labour message across, because Labour voters need to know where we stand, and that's what I'm going to be doing over the next 10 days. What happens in the last few days is a matter for discussion later.
For many people the issue is immigration, and Labour is perceived to have something of an open door policy on immigration.
I think that the Conservative government should announce that they're going to put more resources into those communities that have been hit by rising numbers of people, and I would do this for the health service, for schools, the pressure on public services, because that is what people have been most worried about. And equally, I think we've got to tackle illegal immigration.
Now, Labour thinks one of the reasons it's not being heard is because the media is too obsessed with Tory internal fighting. So here's an internal Labour spat.
Gordon talked about illegal immigration. In most of the Labour heartlands, it's not illegal immigration that is the issue for people, because there's hardly any illegal immigration there. It's perfectly legal immigration from the European Union that's concerning people.
We need a man to tell us what to do.
Well, these senior Labour women think leaving it to their middle-aged male colleagues hasn't worked. Though is it the messenger or the message that's been holding back Remain's cause? Robert Peston, News at 10.
The sensitivity of the referendum debate and the perils of social media were illustrated today by an online poster from the Leave EU campaign, which was quickly condemned before it was removed. It linked staying in to what it called an Orlando-style atrocity, not exactly tactful, and so it was pointed out.
Even as America was still counting its dead, this poster appeared on the Twitter account of Leave.eu, warning, Islamist terrorism is a real threat to our way of life. Act now before we see an Orlando-style atrocity here before too long. The picture was attached to a message which claimed the free movement of Kalashnikovs in Europe helps terrorists. Vote for greater security on June the 23rd. Vote Leave. In the House of Commons, it was condemned as a naked attempt to exploit the tragedy for political gain by all sides.
Will she join me in condemning this highly offensive piece of propaganda?
I think it is utterly irresponsible. This is a terrible and horrific homophobic terrorist attack that is taking place, and I think attempts to link it into the issue of membership or the others of the European Union should rightly be condemned on all sides of this House.
We've all got our bit to do, haven't we? Hello, how are we? All right.
Leave.eu is one of the groups campaigning to leave Europe with close links to UKIP. But today, even Nigel Farage wasn't trying to defend the message.
I saw it a few seconds ago. I understand some office junior sanctioned it and it's now been withdrawn. It's generally better after an atrocity to wait a period of time before making any comment of any kind at all.
As for the official Leave campaign, they were at pains to distance themselves from the language and intent.
I think whichever side of the argument in the referendum on the 23rd you're on, I think it is just not appropriate to use a public tragedy which happened in the United States to make a case which is really quite unrelated to the sides we're taking here.
Despite the criticism, Leave.eu republished the tweet this afternoon, evidence of quite how heated the last days of the referendum campaign have become and how for some no topic is off limits in their determination to make a case. Romilly Weeks, News at 10.
In South Africa, the Olympic and Paralympic athlete Oscar Pistorius once again had the eyes of the world on him today as he returned to court for sentencing after his manslaughter conviction was increased to murder last December. A psychologist said he should not be sent to jail for killing his girlfriend, Reeva Steenkamp, because of his fragile mental state, calling him an ill and broken man who needed to be in hospital. The prosecution wants him jailed for 15 years. The original trial judge will decide once she has heard from both prosecution and defence. Finally tonight, the Orlando shootings, which dominated the start of our programme, have prompted worldwide sympathy in the past 24 hours. The Eiffel Tower was lit up with the rainbow shades of the gay pride movement this evening. Earlier in Sydney, the Harbour Bridge shone with the same colours. In Orlando itself, where the city's big wheel also reflected the sense of loss, the people are determined to remain united against violence.
Where do you go after the horror? How do you find solace amid the grief and the shock? The Joy Metropolitan Community Church in Orlando is a place where friends and neighbours of the dead are trying to help one another.
We want to say to all those people who are trying to scare us back into the closets that we're not made for people, that we're staying out of those closets.
So many people in Orlando wanted to stand with the victims, to stand in line, in fact, to give blood and meet the demands of multiple injuries.
There's not a lot I can do except for say, I'm sorry, I'm there with you, and donate blood.
It's personal for you?
Yes. Very personal.
I mean, obviously it was an attack on the LGBT community, and that's something that we do need to talk about, but it was also an attack on Americans.
There's much debate in this election year about how best to defend American values. Well, what happened in the nightclub was an attack on the most important one, freedom. And it's a fierce objection to that, which is one of the things that's bringing people together here. There are, of course, many in American society for whom talk of togetherness and unity isn't just a comforting ideal, but an urgent necessity.
It has been, for the last 24 hours, a horrible backlash, a lot of threats, a lot of hate. The social media is, all of our channels are being bombarded with hate and threats.
What do you say to the haters?
I say to the haters, their hate is what generated this.
Together is where many in this city want to be in the aftermath of this attack. But as its causes are debated in the coming days and weeks, together might be a difficult place for America to stay. Geraint Vincent, News at 10, Orlando.
Well, before we go, let's just take a quick look forward to things that might be happening tomorrow. We'll be reporting from Orlando again. Of course, Raggy will be looking at Omar Martin himself and Robert Moore will be focusing on gun law, as you heard him say earlier in the programme, an enormously divisive issue still. We'll be following the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, you're just looking at there, as he lines up alongside union leaders to give a speech about why the UK should remain in the European Union. It is the first day of Royal Ascot, and among the many bets the bookmakers are taking is whether Prince William and Kate will join the Queen for the first time this year. The odds that they will are apparently 10 to 1. You can bet on anything, can't you? And why the good old-fashioned brick is the hot new trend in modern architecture, as we get a look at a new 10-storey extension to London's Tate Modern Art Gallery, which opens on Friday. Join me again tomorrow. I'll be here same time, same place. In the meantime, thank you very much indeed for watching.